I think 165 acres is a lot. I think we'll leave a lot of it kind of just rugged, and it leaves a lot of room for growth.
For over a decade, the world has been utterly captivated by the sprawling, complicated, and frequently chaotic saga of the Brown family on TLC's Sister Wives, a series that was packaged and sold to us as a bold exploration of plural marriage in modern America, but which has increasingly revealed itself to be less about faith and family and more about control, selfishness, and manipulation. Audiences were invited, almost seduced, into the illusion of intimacy, watching them navigate the legal and social minefields of polygamy, moving from a modest home in Utah to the ostentatious illusion of togetherness in a cul-de-sac of oversized Las Vegas mansions, and ultimately to the fractured, dust-choked dream of Coyote Pass in Flagstaff, where promises of a grand shared estate dissolved into nothing more than bitter arguments and unfulfilled plans. And along the way, we were granted a front row seat to births, teenage marriages, humiliating catfishing scandals, endless relocations, passive-aggressive family councils, and the slow, agonizing disintegration of a family that once so confidently preached unity, loyalty, and spiritual love. Yet what if the story we were sold was never the truth? What if those carefully edited confessionals where wives wept under studio lights, those dramatic family meetings filmed with swelling background music, and those declarations of unity against the outside world were merely a facade, a carefully painted veneer designed to conceal something far darker, far more painful and insidious than any television camera dared to reveal? And now, with the passing of time, the curtain has finally been ripped back, not by a hungry tabloid or anonymous insider desperate for attention, but by one of their own flesh and blood, Mykelti Brown, Padron, daughter of Kody Brown and his now ex-wife, Christine, who has spoken with startling frankness, lifting the veil to expose a portrait of dysfunction so disturbing that it forces us to reconsider every single episode we have ever watched. Because if you are willing to confront the truth, you will discover that the smiling patriarch we were encouraged to pity as a man torn between too many households was not a struggling husband and father at all, but something far more calculating, manipulative, and self-serving. And that the wives who appeared complicit were not free participants, but trapped women working within a system designed to keep them dependent. And at the very foundation of this rotten structure lies the issue that has always haunted the Browns' money. For years, viewers were spoon-fed the idea of a noble family pot, a communal fund into which the considerable income from their hit series was deposited, shared equally to support all 4 wives and all 18 children. And we watched as the wives gathered around kitchen tables, scribbling figures on notepads, sighing about bills, and we saw Kody fretting about his supposed burden of providing for such a vast clan. And we, the audience, accepted the premise that here was a family bound by shared sacrifice, enduring both burdens and blessings together. Yet Mykelti now tells us that this too was a fiction, that the family pot was nothing but a myth, and the reality was something closer to a financial dictatorship with Kody Brown enthroned as its sole ruler. Because according to her, every single dollar generated by the show was funneled into a company called Kody Brown Family Entertainment LLC. And whilst this might sound like standard business practice on the surface, the devil, as the saying goes, lurks in the details. For Kody alone controlled the accounts, wielding absolute financial power, while the 4 women, Meri, Janelle, Christine, and Robyn, who sacrificed their privacy, dignity, and labor for the cameras, had no direct access to the money their own lives generated. They were not partners in a joint venture, but more like employees who had to bow before their husband's boss and request an allowance to keep their homes running, to cover mortgages, utilities, car installments, school supplies, even the bread and milk that kept their children fed. And this created a power dynamic that was not merely unequal, but fundamentally abusive, stripping the wives of autonomy, chaining them in dependency upon a man whose approval became the gateway to every single household decision. And whilst the cameras rolled, presenting images of women who argued over budgeting in a way that seemed almost relatable, the reality was that those women were In truth, subjects appealing to their king. And the hypocrisy at the heart of it is staggering. For while the wives were tasked with stretching paltry sums to feed more than 20 mouths, Kody treated his portion of the income as a personal slush fund to indulge whims. And the most damning example of all came with their very first significant check from TLC. The moment that should have secured stability, paid off debts, and built a foundation for their children's futures. Yet instead of acting as the captain of the ship, guiding his family towards security, Kody chose to buy himself a brand new top-of-the-line Lexus convertible. A gleaming toy for one man purchased with money earned by the suffering and sacrifice of many. And the symbolism of that car could not be clearer. Whilst his wives calculated grocery receipts and rationed food, Kody was cruising through Las Vegas, reveling in luxury, flaunting his comfort while sending a brutal message. My desires matter more than your survival. My image takes precedence over your needs, and the supposed family money was nothing of the sort. It was Kody's private treasury, from which scraps were tossed to his wives and children, and Mykelti elaborates further, describing her father's spending habits as entirely detached from the grinding reality of his family's struggles, explaining with a bitter laugh that he never spent his personal money on groceries unless it was for himself, like a UFC fight night where he wanted steak sizzling on the grill. And even then, it was likely one of the wives who had to purchase it. And this seemingly small detail is, in fact, profoundly revealing, for it illustrates the depth of his selfishness. The only time he considered food money a worthy expense was when it fed his entertainment, not when it nourished his children. And suddenly, all those endless scenes of financial stress on the show, Janelle worrying about the budget, Christine voicing frustration, Meri lamenting her isolation, Robyn demanding a lavish rental home, are recast not as the messy negotiations of equal partners, but as the desperate pleas of women begging for resources from a monarch indifferent to their needs. And the purchase of the Lexus was not merely irresponsible. It was betrayal, a public declaration of his priorities, proving that he was not the captain guiding his family through stormy seas, but the passenger in first class sipping champagne whilst his wives and children toiled below deck, desperately trying to keep the ship afloat. And this financial monarchy laid the groundwork for something even more chilling. Because if a man was so willing to neglect his family's financial welfare for the sake of his own luxury, how might he behave when confronted with a true crisis? One concerning not money but the health and safety of his children. And the answer, according to Mykelti, is as devastating as it is unforgivable. For during their time in the Las Vegas cul-de-sac, that supposed emblem of their unity, for houses side by side in perfect symbolism, Christine had to travel, leaving teenage daughters, Mykelti and Aspen, to care for their younger siblings, including 3-year-old Truly. And what began as a routine few days quickly descended into nightmare when Truly became violently ill. Not a passing bug, but a sickness so severe it terrified the girls, leaving them panicked and desperate for adult help. And just a few steps away, in Robyn's house, sat their father. Yet when Aspen phoned him, frantic and begging, his response was incomprehensible. He refused to come, claiming he was busy with Robyn and her children. And so his 3-year-old daughter lay gravely ill. His teenage daughters were overwhelmed with fear, and their father chose his comfort, his other household, over them. And only when Christine, hundreds of miles away, rang him herself and insisted did he finally appear. But even then, his involvement was minimal, half-hearted, a man irritated by inconvenience rather than gripped by paternal concern. And soon, Truly was hospitalized with acute kidney failure, a condition that could easily have claimed her life. And though the program showed us tender footage of Kody and Christine at her bedside, presenting the facade of worried parents, Mykelti insists this too was staged, explaining that Kody appeared only when cameras were present, performing fatherhood for the audience, and when they packed up, he disappeared, leaving Christine to endure the long nights and the real terror alone. And what emerges here is not merely selfishness, but a profound emotional vacancy. The absence of even the most basic instinct of a parent to protect their child. And the cul-de-sac once sold to viewers as a utopian arrangement was instead the scene of parental neglect so cold it borders upon cruelty. And Mykelti warns this was not an isolated event, but symptomatic of a larger pattern woven into the very fabric of their plural marriage. For she describes the Brown family system not as a shared spiritual commitment, but as a mechanism engineered to enable patriarchal laziness, where men like Kody enjoy the status of many wives without undertaking the responsibilities of daily fatherhood. And in her words, polygamy makes men lazy because it really does. You think? I don't need to be there for my wives. They'll be there for each other. I don't need to raise my kids. I have enough wives to do that for me. And with this blunt indictment, the entire show collapses in retrospect. Because what we thought we were watching, a family striving for unity in adversity, was in truth a group of overworked women functioning as single mothers, enabling the comfortable existence of a man who saw them not as partners, but as a workforce. And his refusal to help with Truly was not merely favoritism towards Robyn. It was the logical extension of a worldview that never considered childcare to be his responsibility at all. And so, when Christine finally reached her breaking point and chose to leave, Kody's outrage and confusion made sense only in his own mind. For he could not comprehend why she would abandon what he saw as her covenant. But Christine was not leaving a marriage. She was resigning from a thankless job. She was withdrawing her labor from a machine that consumed her energy and love, whilst giving nothing in return. And in doing so, she exposed the rot at the very heart of the Sister Wives illusion for the entire world too. See, Kody's endless rants in the later seasons about loyalty and respect now sound utterly transformed when placed under the harsh light of Mykelti's revelations. For he was never truly pleading for the affection and devotion of a loving wife, as he theatrically claimed on camera, but rather demanding the blind obedience of subordinates who had dared to question a system that was designed from the very beginning for his comfort alone. He felt betrayed not because his partners had stopped loving him, but because, in daring to voice their grievances, they threatened to append his carefully constructed labor-free lifestyle, a life built on the unpaid, unacknowledged, and uncompensated toil of 4 women who carried the entire weight of his supposed kingdom upon their shoulders whilst he enjoyed the luxuries of patriarchal privilege. And so Mykelti's testimony is nothing less than a paradigm shift that forces us to rethink the whole Sister Wives narrative from start to finish. For the problems within this family were never truly about petty jealousy, disputes over property, or the exhausting pressures of reality television as Kody and TLC producers like to package it, but about the rot at the very heart of the structure itself. A flawed design of polygamy as practiced in the Brown household. A patriarchal paradise that was never about faith or family unity, but about convenience for one man. A design destined to collapse the very moment any of the women recognized their own worth and refused to accept its perpetual subjugation. And the cost of this systemic neglect would ripple out with devastating consequences, particularly for the younger children who were left to navigate a fractured reality after. Divorce scattered what was once branded as one family, with the case of Truly Brown standing as perhaps the most harrowing illustration of how Kody's disregard for paternal responsibility evolved from passive absence into overt neglect. For when Christine, with immense courage, packed her bags and left Flagstaff for Utah in search of peace and autonomy, she tried her utmost to ensure that their youngest daughter still had some semblance of a bond with her father, arranging visits to Kody and Robyn's home, hoping that shared time might soften the wounds. But what unfolded instead were scenes so chilling in their thoughtlessness that they verge on cruelty. For Mykelti revealed that during one of these visits, young Truly was assigned a bedroom not even connected to the interior of Robyn's house, but instead one, accessible only by an exterior door, forcing a child to walk outside through the dark, just to reach the bathroom or the kitchen. A physical separation that carried with it a cruel symbolic message. You are not part of the family within these walls. You are a visitor, an outsider, kept apart from the core unit. On another occasion, she was offered a so-called bedroom that contained little more than a bare mattress on the floor, with no bed frame, no lamp, no comforts, and no blinds or curtains on the windows. leaving her exposed to both glaring daylight at dawn and the unsettling possibility of strangers peering in at night. A setup so careless it screamed that her presence was an afterthought, an inconvenience unworthy of even the smallest gesture of hospitality. And then there was the birthday visit when food was prepared for the family, yet not enough chicken was cooked to feed everyone, with Truly singled out as the one left without her own portion. A moment that might seem small to the unfeeling, but which to a child is a searing memory. A reminder that she was not seen, not valued, not even considered important enough to be included in the most basic act of care, the sharing of a meal. And these were not one-off oversights, but part of a grim pattern that reinforced the message that her comfort, her safety, her emotional well-being were all utterly irrelevant in her father's home, which is why Christine's decision to pursue a formal custody agreement, depicted on the program as a point of contention and drama, now reads very differently. Not the act of a bitter ex-wife trying to withhold a child, but that of a fiercely protective mother fighting to shield her daughter from environments that consistently failed to meet even the most minimal standards of care. And Mykelti is clear that the scars of those visits run deep. For since then, Truly has not stayed overnight alone with Kody and Robyn, her trust irreparably broken. Her father's house cemented in her mind not as a place of safety, but as one of exclusion and discomfort. And yet this is but one layer of the wider catastrophe, because their public life as reality stars means that even private wounds are forced open, again and again for public consumption, leading us to Mykelti's most damning conclusion of all, that the very show which made them famous has become the chief obstacle preventing any hope of healing. For Sister Wives, she says, no longer documents their lives but actively destroys them, providing Kody with a platform to smear his wives and children under the guise of confessionals, weaponizing his airtime to present himself as victim whilst labeling anyone who challenges him as disrespectful or disloyal, effectively bullying his own children on national television for profit, creating a vicious cycle whereby a painful conflict occurs in private, then is rehashed months later for filming, spun to suit Kody's narrative, and finally broadcast to millions, forcing those same children to relive the pain anew, only now with the added humiliation of watching their father disparage them before the entire world, leaving no space for genuine reconciliation because any tender moment risks being undone in the edit suite and reframed as yet another storyline. And so Mykelti's plea is simple but devastating. The show must end if healing is ever to begin. For as long as cameras roll, the family will remain trapped in a cycle where drama is rewarded, conflict is manufactured, and forgiveness is impossible. And when we re-examine old episodes in this light, the pattern becomes undeniable. Whether it was Kody unilaterally dragging the family from Las Vegas to Flagstaff under the illusion of a collective decision when in truth he alone controlled the money and the fate of more than 20 people, or the glaring disparity in housing where Robyn, with Kody's unwavering backing, secured a sprawling mansion while Christine and others begged for scraps, or the wives' desperate ventures into LuLaRoe and Badon breakfast ownership, once framed as harmless side projects, but now revealed as survival strategies, attempts to claw back some tiny shred of financial independence from a man who weaponized money to control every aspect of their lives. And so, taken together, Mykelti's 5 revelations strip away the glossy facade to reveal a reality both bleak and enraging. That Kody Brown was never the beleaguered patriarch struggling to keep order in a vast and unwieldy family, but a selfish man propped up by the labor of women. A man who once bought himself a Lexus with their first paycheck while his children went without. A man who refused to walk across a cul-de-sac to aid his gravely ill toddler. A man who created an unsafe space for his youngest daughter in favor of pampering his newest wife. And who now clings to a television show, not for transparency, but because it provides him with the only weapon he has left, the power to control the narrative at the expense of his family's dignity, leaving us, the viewers, to ask with growing unease, what is the true human cost of televising trauma? And how many more of the Brown children must come forward with their stories before this spectacle is finally brought to an end? Kody and Robyn were, of course, vehemently opposed to Meri's dream, dismissing it on camera as a foolish distraction and a poor investment. But when we strip away the layers of their argument, the truth becomes glaringly obvious. This was never truly about the money, nor about practicality, but about control. For Meri dared to envision a project that would belong to her alone, a legacy rooted in her own family history, a source of income that would not filter through Kody's hands, but instead give her a measure of independence that terrified him. Because by assisting her, by lending support or financial backing, he would effectively be financing the erosion of his own patriarchal authority. And so his refusal was never the calculated business decision he portrayed it to be, but a power play. A deliberate act of suppression to remind his first wife that in this so-called plural marriage, he alone dictated who thrived and who was left to wither. And thus, Meri was forced to scrape together the funds for her bed and breakfast on her own. An act of resilience that also stood as a dangerous rebellion against a man who had built an empire on keeping his wives in financial bondage. For the Brown family's monetary system was never simply unfair. It was the very scaffold of Kody's dominance, the mechanism through which he rewarded loyalty, punished dissent, and maintained a state of perpetual dependency that ensured that no matter how deeply unhappy or neglected his wives became, they would find themselves unable to walk away until, of course, Christine shattered the cycle by finding her own way out. And it is in this context that Mykelti's second devastating revelation about neglect takes on its full meaning. Because when we consider his refusal to aid Truly during her frightening illness, just steps away from his door and set it beside the infamous story of Isabel's scoliosis surgery, what emerges is a chilling pattern that reveals not merely an absent father, but an actively negligent one. A man who consistently chose his own comfort over the pain of his children. For we all remember those harrowing episodes. Watching Isabel endure years of braces and painful exercises before the inevitable conclusion arrived. A complex spinal surgery in New Jersey that would demand months of planning, quarantine, and courage. And in that crucible moment, when any daughter would most need the steady presence of her father, Kody excused himself from duty, claiming the protocols of COVID made it impossible, arguing that separation from Robyn and her children was too high a price. And so he looked into the tearful eyes of a girl about to have her spine fused and told her, in essence, that she was not worth the sacrifice, leaving Christine to shoulder the unbearable weight alone, the logistics, the travel, the terror, the endless recovery, while Isabel herself wept openly on camera, confessing that her father's priorities did not lie with her. A moment of raw agony that confirmed everything viewers had long suspected. And this abandonment was not an isolated incident, but a mirror of the neglect Mykelti exposed with Truly. In both cases, daughters suffering whilst their fathers stood available, yet unmoved, refusing to act because the effort would disturb his preferred arrangement, proving that his selective fatherhood extended only where it suited him. A truth further illuminated when we contrast his indifference towards Isabel and Truly with his overflowing attentiveness to Robyn's children. Scenes of him comforting Aurora during panic attacks, guiding Brianna through driving lessons, adopting them legally, and celebrating his role as their father with pride. And while none would criticize him for loving them deeply, it becomes an indictment of his complete failure to extend even a fraction of that devotion to the 13 children he fathered with his other wives, revealing a fatherhood that was not universal but conditional, doled out only to the favored branch of his family tree. And so, Mykelti's testimony about Truly's exclusion becomes not a single tragic memory, but the blueprint of Kody's entire style of parenting, present for the cameras, absent when it truly mattered, a pattern that left sons like Gabe and Garrison alienated and bitter, daughters like Isabel devastated, and Christine forced into legal action to protect her youngest child from a father whose home offered no security. But this neglect cannot be separated from the broader system that Mykelti dissected in her third takeaway. The revelation that their brand of polygamy was never about faith or family, but about constructing a life of ease for a man who could delegate every ounce of real labor to his wives, And the evidence is scattered across every season of the show. Christine, the eternal caregiver. Janelle, the financial engine. Meri, the silent supporter. All running the household machine, while Kody played at being the visionary CEO. A role that in practice amounted to throwing out grand ideas like the single house blueprint for Coyote Pass. Then storming off in rage when the women, who would actually bear the consequences, voiced objections, leaving them to handle the emotional and practical wreckage of his tantrums. A pattern of patriarchal laziness that reached its apex with the disastrous Flagstaff move. A decision Kody drove whilst his wives bore the cost. Janelle forced into an RV on barren land. Christine marooned in a home she despised, the support system of their Las Vegas cul-de-sac obliterated. And Kody himself retreating into Robyn's mansion as though he were a monogamist. His dream reduced to dust before it was ever built. And yet he carried on baffled at the implosion of his family. Unable to comprehend that the women who had sustained his comfortable reign were no longer willing to serve. Enraged at the collapse of a kingdom that had been erected on their unpaid sacrifices. And this crumbling system manifested most painfully in the treatment of the children. Embodied in Truly's bleak visits where she was given a mattress on the floor, a room with an outside door, insufficient food. All physical symbols of emotional exclusion. While Kody accused Christine of alienation, spinning a narrative of victimhood on camera that Mykelti has now shredded as fabrication. For no child needs coaching to feel unwanted when they are literally lodged as an afterthought, treated as an outsider in their father's house. And yet the cruelty did not end there, because the family's entrapment in the machinery of reality. Television ensured that these private pains would be replayed and magnified, each raw wound reopened by the lens. For Kody seized his confessionals not as spaces of reflection, but as weapons, calling sons jerks, painting Christine as bitter, reframing Isabel's choices as betrayals, using the platform of sister wives to gaslight his own children before a global audience, creating a cycle of public humiliation that left no room for reconciliation. Because how could a son forgive a father who simultaneously broadcast his disdain? How could a daughter heal when her tears became storyline fodder for ratings? And thus Mykelti's final plea rings as the most tragic of all, that the show itself must end for the family to ever hope for healing for as long as the cameras remain. Every interaction is poisoned by performance, every motive suspect, every attempt at repair undermined by the knowledge that producers may twist it into a plot, leaving the Browns as a family devoured by the very spectacle that made them famous. Their private lives sacrificed on the altar of entertainment. And now with children like Mykelti breaking their silence, the curated facade collapses, revealing not a tale of plural love, but of exploitation, neglect, and control, and forcing us, the viewers, to ask ourselves whether our appetite for drama has come at too great a human cost. At too great a human cost.